Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I didn't go into the abandoned branch to prove anything. I went because sound is a map, and maps are how I calm a crowded mind. I'm an acoustics engineer with a background in rail noise, wheel-rail contact, flange squeal in tight radius curves, resonance in concrete tubes. I consult on everything from office reverberation to vibration isolation for concert halls built over train lines. That's how I met the tunnels in the first place, treating them not as folklore but as instruments. And that's why, when the city quieted and headlines spiraled into the same anxious paragraph, I said yes when Mason texted, "Aldwych branch, after hours, one night only, bring your meters." He ran a small urban history channel, walkthroughs of decommissioned control rooms, forgotten lift shafts, the civic engineering of a century ago told without drama. He didn't do stunts, didn't teach people how to break rules. He had permission sometimes, less than permission other times. He always asked me to come along when he wanted to get the details right. Why there are 4 rails, not 3 on the old tube. Why the track bed smells like wet coins. Why a tunnel can feel silent while screaming. We met on a windy corner near the Strand. The theatre lights dimmed to caretaker glow. It was just us, a small crew, me, Mason behind a camera big enough to make strangers behave. Jules, who worked paramedic shifts in a high-vis jacket, rolled into a tight cylinder for her pack. And Arjun, a civil engineer, who knew the language of bench walls and sump pumps and never complained about mud. We wore caving helmets with clipped headlamps and brought big, boring safety. Steel toe boots, gloves, a carbon monoxide monitor, a handheld multi-gas detector, basic first aid, foil blankets, portable radios set to a simple half-watt channel, and an old orange loudhailer that still smelled faintly like school assembly. We didn't talk about how we were getting in, partly because we didn't want to say it out loud, partly because a thing loses shape when you describe it too carefully. We suited up under the lee of a doorway and moved with the weather. The air shifted the way it does in the bowels of a city. A cool exhale from somewhere lower down. The set of our shoulders changed as street noise subdued to a soft surf of distant traffic. Tiles appeared, cream and green, curved into the tunnel geometry of 1907. Then the vault of a ticket hall with empty poster frames and the faint perfume of old cleaning agents. The space had that peculiar quiet of sealed buildings. Not the hush of absence, but a pressure that collects in masonry. The spiral stairs were as I remembered from a sanctioned tour years back. Steps slightly shallower than you expect. A brass handrail rubbed dull by generations of palms. Painted numbers at landings that alternated between comforting and oppressive. "Half power to lamps," I said out of habit. "Keep a spare battery warm if you can." "Copy," Mason said, grinning, and the radios crackled, as if to remind us we weren't alone just because we chose the empty places. At platform level, Aldwych was itself a porcelain postcard of Edwardian tube, arched vaults, tea-coloured stains where seepage met tile grout, a timbered signal box long ago decommissioned, the platform curve gentle enough to make your knees believe in trains that no longer came. And beyond the far end, past the no public access sign, the tunnel mouth, a clean line of black. "Give me the basics," Mason said, rolling as he panned across the vault. He made 3 million people feel like 6 curious friends, and I envied him for that. "Fourth rail system," I said, pointing to the rails because people always asked. The outer conductor rail is positive, around 420 volts DC, and the center conductor rail is negative, about negative 210. Together, you get about 630. It's isolated from the running rails, so signals can use the rails as part of detection circuits. Do not touch. Even if a line is de-energized here, that doesn't mean it's safe there. "Safe there," Mason echoed, then angled up to catch the ceiling in frame. "And these beautiful tiles, Lena." glazed for light back when bulbs were dim and you cleaned with a mop bucket. And these iron ribs, early steelwork that took the load of London's dreams. Jules laughed softly. Say that again when we get to the wet bits. If you've never stood where the public is not meant to be, let me tell you how the sound shifts when you leave the platform and walk out past the end. Even your careful feet sound unpermitted. Every scuff is an argument with dust that remembers. The bench wall became a narrow ledge snug to the tunnel wall, built to keep maintenance crews out of the path of a train. The track bed, dusty ballast in places, poured concrete elsewhere, was broken by rectangular pits for drainage and cable chambers with cast iron lids. Blue lights mounted every so often marked emergency telephone points and power isolation switches. Silent witnesses of a system built both to move and to protect. We clipped onto each other with a caving tether, not because we couldn't see. Our headlamps turned the black into a clipped cone of honest greys, but because habits are a second set of eyes. Our June kept count of refuges, shallow scallops in the wall, every 20-odd meters, where you could flatten yourself if a train came, and there was nowhere else. He kept count like a mantra. 3, 4, 5. At the first bell mouth, the place where a planned connection to another line never quite happened, the tunnel opened like a question, a sidebore bricked off with a neatness that felt British in a way even my own jokes never manage. Loomed and then fell behind. Water startled from the ceiling in individual drops, and every drop found something different to sing against. A tie plate, a cable clip, concrete that had aged into stone. My meter, a little handheld recorder with a draft of spectral analysis on its screen, caught something under the drip. I raised a flat palm. We stopped. The sound was low, intermittent, a faint, far squeal that rose to a knife edge and fell to a whisper, like the breath of a violin too far away to be polite. Arjun leaned in. S-curve squeal, he murmured, as if not to wake it. Yeah, I said, but the Aldwych branch doesn't have an S that tight beyond the platform, and there was cadence in it. A periodic rise and fall that suggested rotation, axles taking a curve, the flange of a wheel kissing the railhead. It was so faint I could have called it memory and made a nicer video. Could be the Piccadilly, Mason offered, because the main line still ran a block away, and sound travels through the belly of the city like secrets through families. Could be, I said, but it wasn't quite right. The frequency drifted too regularly, like something articulating, like a very slow wheel with a flat spot chuffing in cycles, or like stress relaxation in steel. Thermal movement against clips, a rail sighing in its sleep. We kept moving. Flooding began in earnest at 100 meters, ankle deep in a section where the invert sat a hair lower, then calf deep near a low point that must have been over the sump. We pulled on waders Jules had insisted we pack, knee-high, pale, ridiculous, and moved one careful foot at a time, as the water turned headlamp light into a broken chandelier. CO is clean, Jules reported as our detector blinked an indifferent green. Oxygen normal. If that changes, I get bossy. You already get bossy, Mason said, which is how you tell someone you trust them more than your own judgment. The phantom squeal returned, as we rounded a gentle curve past an old signal post with its lamp broken and its enamel plate still legible. The sound was clearer. It had learned to live in the tunnel and use it. It skirted our frequencies like a fox skirts a garden. Then, from behind that, something else. A rhythm too uneven to be mechanical, soft on soft, water shivering, in a way our feet weren't making. Footsteps, Jules whispered, almost apologizing to the word. We turned as one, as if we'd practiced. 4 beams stitched the air and landed on the tunnel behind us, where our path fell to blackout. In that stitched light, we saw nothing but our own wake in the water. Copy, Mason said into the radio, out of habit more than hope. Copy, 3 voices said, which should have been funny and wasn't. We pressed on. The footsteps didn't come closer. They never do when you're not sure you want them to. The squeal slipped forward, and every time it rose, the footsteps seemed to gain a little heart. Sound does that. It makes courage where you don't deserve it, or it reveals hunger you didn't plan for. The first person we saw down there was standing in a shallow refuge with her palms flat against the tile, as if something had pressed her there. She wore a dark winter coat soaked three ways, from above, from below, from an effort too long sustained. Her hair hung stiff with dried tunnel air. When we asked if she was okay, she turned her head slowly, and the way she did it made me think of cameras in slow motion, as if her brain lagged behind her face. "Are you hurt?" Jules asked, calm as a station announcer. She answered with a noise that wasn't a word. The sound made the tiny muscles in my forearms go tight, even before my mind translated anything. It was like hearing language from behind a wall. "Give me your hands," Jules said. The woman didn't move. Jules stepped closer, cautious but committed, and shone her lamp low to avoid the eyes. It's instinct, I suppose, to put light on another face to see it better. But light is more than vision down there. It's an argument about control. When Jules's headlamp angle changed, the woman's breath changed too. Her fingers clawed briefly against tile, as if traction was something you could buy with your nails. "Hold," Arjun said very softly. He reached up and put his palm over Jules's lamp lens until the beam narrowed and then winked out. In the dark, the woman's breath slowed. When Arjun slid his hand away and a ghost of light came back, she flexed, as if something behind her ribs had told both legs to sprint. I kept my voice flat to smooth the idea. I think light makes them twitchy, not scared, irritated, like it's pulling signal through noise where there's too much noise already. "Exactly how clinical do you want me to be right now?" Jules murmured. "When you're telling me not to look?" "Light down," Mason said, and the four headlamps dimmed to a soft ring at our boots, turning the world into a lantern-lit cave. It should have felt more vulnerable. It felt like a truce we could live with for the next 10 meters. "Ma'am," Jules said, and the word did the gentle work it always does. "We're going to move by you. If you want to come, you can hold my sleeve. If you want to stay, I'll leave a light here low to help you see your hands." The woman made no sign that she understood. We stepped along the bench wall in single file. She snapped her head toward us when we came close enough to smell cold wool and the metallic air of stress, then turned it away again when our pooled light slid past. When we were beyond, there was a little splashing, as if she'd changed her mind and then changed it back. "What's the plan?" Mason asked when our nerves stopped pretending they were useful and returned to their posts as ordinary nerves. "Keep the lights pointed down," I said. "Treat eye contact like a siren, and if we need speed, we go dark and hand to shoulder." "Copy," Arjun said, "and count the refuges." 7, 8, he went on, steady. The tunnel stayed itself, which was a kind of relief. The phantom squeals swelled in and out like a tide. The footsteps, that second sound I wanted not to give the dignity of a word, faded for a while, and then returned with a confidence that felt earned. "Could be more than one," Mason said. "Could be," I answered, and wanted to laugh because that sentence could serve as caption to an entire city. Past the side passage, with a bricked bulkhead and a wired-off stack of old timbers, the water deepened briefly over a sill, and we shuffled with the awkward grace of people who know full mechanics and the physics of wet boots. The air grew cooler, the way air does in a lung that's working too hard. Arjun tapped my shoulder and pointed up at a ventilation duct that ran perpendicular overhead, a rectangular trunk with rivets like braille. You could almost feel a ghost of air moving, some larger system breathing a floor above. "Pump room should be near," he said. "Sump depth under the invert suggests a chamber off to the right by the curve." He was right within a dozen meters. A door with danger, electrical equipment stenciled over paint that had been paint 5 paint jobs ago, hung a step off plumb. We didn't try it. You don't open doors underground out of curiosity. You open them when you're made to. The squeal climbed again, and with it, a scrape sounded far ahead. A hollow metallic rasp like a coupler tapping something hard. It triggered an itch I recognized from nights in active depots. The bracing you do when a train moves in a place your map insists is incapable of train. "Arjun," I said, "what's our nearest running pair to this branch?" "Piccadilly eastbound," he said. "Distance varies with curve. There's a crossover beyond Holborn. Kingsway tram subway above. None of that should be singing like this through this tunnel." He glanced at my meter. "What's your spectrum telling you, maestro?" "Peak around 1 kilohertz with strong harmonics and a modulation around 1 per second," I said automatically, which is a way of saying something big somewhere is cycling at a humanish pace. That could have been a pump. It could have been a wheel dragging. It could have been, my least favorite, footfalls organized by a group not entirely aware it was organized. I wanted it to be the pump. We reached a short section where the bench wall fell away, and there was a no clearance sign stenciled onto tile with red that had not faded at the same rate as everything else. That meant the tunnel geometry pinched here. It meant if a train came, you didn't jog anywhere, and you didn't turn to stone because stone gets clipped. You climbed onto the little iron rung, bolted at waist height, and made yourself the shape of the wall. It was a trick of many shapes, and it could save you a life. We stopped. We rehearsed those movements the way you rehearse doorways in a kitchen you've just moved into. We moved past, one at a time, like threading a buckle. Our beams stayed on our boots and the wall and did not look up to find a face. When we came out into the wider section, there were 3 more people. They were not a group in the way a group is a choice. They were a few long yards apart, as if tuned to different clocks. One was half down in a drainage pit with his back against the edge, both hands slapping at the concrete with short, efficient rhythm. His eyes were open and meaningless in the way eyes are when they've given up the job of choosing. His sleeves were pushed up, and I saw scratches on the forearms that looked more like bramble than violence. No one made a sound like pain. No one asked for help. They were so quiet it was a policy. "Jules," Mason said, "because the human heart has a very short list of things it can watch without acting." Jules held up one flat palm. The first time I watched her do that to a crowd, I thought it was a magician's move. Now I know it is a sign to herself to keep her promise not to make things worse. "Do not approach," she said in that same station-safe voice. "If you can hear me and want to come with us, we're going to put a light on the ground. You can follow it." We eased a small flood lamp out of a pack. It was one of those heavy square things you clip under a car if you're fixing it in a driveway. We set it on the bench wall aimed down at our boots and lowered the brightness until the concrete saw us as politely as we saw it. The 3 people did not react, but farther along, beyond the gentle bend, the footsteps that were not ours sped up in a way that made a different part of my brain start measuring distances and ratios. If light made them faster, we needed to think like sound. "Arjun," I said, "how many refuges to the next cross passage?" 2, he answered instantly. "There's a connecting stair between the 2 bores. Another is bricked." He pointed to the pattern in the wall that telegraphed hidden architecture, a different brick bond, a faint ghost of an old enamel plate. "Okay," I said, "we need to test a hypothesis. Lights off for 5 seconds, count quietly, then bring them back to half power." "Lena," Mason said. "People." "Headsets on," Jules said. 3, 2, 1. Dark fell like a lid. In it, a sound like running human feet sprinted very fast. There was no cry, there was no talk. There was only water slapped hard and something soft striking something a little less soft, and the gentle grind of a shoe slipping on slime. It all happened to our left. Away from our last low pool of light, it was over in 2 breaths. "Light's half," I whispered. Beams came back as if they had to climb. We did not pan. We looked instead at our own boots and the bench wall and the tiles, which showed us a tiny crescent of surface spread we did not want to name. Jules's jaw tightened, but she kept hand and lamp angles steady. The 3 people near us stood exactly as they had before. Farther along, another footfall comet shot through the dark, too fast to be anyone you'd meet in a street, and again it spent itself in silence. "Right," Arjun said softly. So they recognized the cone. They know where it ends, and they are bolder when they are the definition of unseen. Faster without light, I breathed, and didn't realize I'd said it like a title until Mason repeated it. Faster without light, he said into the camera, voice calm and almost documentary dry, which is its own kind of mercy. We did the next 100 meters with lamps at our shins. We did the next 100 on radio check-ins every 30 seconds. We did the next 50 with our elbows touching and our breath counting. We reached the stair cut that tied our dead tunnel to its twin and stood looking at steps wet as slate and a sign whose paint had flaked in the exact way paint always flakes if you give it 60 years and a wet winter. The door beyond was padlocked in two ways, the cheap modern way and the older way that felt like it had its own ethics. We're not going through that, Mason said, not from reluctance, but from a newly sharpened respect for friction. No, Arjun said, but that vent up there goes somewhere, and the next passage might have a pressure door that isn't married to its frame. The squeal rose like a stopped violin bow dragged very slowly and then stopped as if a hand had gripped a string hard. I could feel it in my molars. Then the footsteps, 2 sets, maybe 3, came back from behind us, a dozen long strides in quick succession, slowed and stopped. The dark beyond our cone felt inhabited, in a way dark doesn't usually need to brag about. All right, I said, the way a teacher says it before she moves the class to a different exercise. We need to redirect attention. What do we have that's bright and loud? I've got the extinguisher, Jules said, patting the red cylinder, a dry powder unit she carried for car crashes and kitchen accidents. It makes a mess, it makes a cloud. It's bright and loud if it hits a lamp, and I've got 2 chem lights. I've got the loudhailer, Mason offered, and a real talent for being annoying. We don't want to call everything in the tunnels, Arjun said. We want to convince the nearest minds that a party is happening over there. He pointed back along the way we'd come, to a refuge that opened into a small cable chamber niche. We're going to do this like a track crew, I said. We're going to step down, place, and step back up on 3. Lights angle to boots. No hero moves. Go. We had done enough night work between us to make 10 seconds of choreography feel like we'd rehearsed in a dance studio. We set the lamp in the cable niche, aimed along the bench wall, like a ribbon of stage light leading away. We cracked a chem light and set it low. We left the extinguisher valve just a touch open so powder whispered and made that itchy, airy hiss you can feel in your teeth. We stepped back onto the bench wall, and the sound of fast feet darted to that glowing breadcrumb like a decision. Move, I said, and we moved. 4 bodies on one line with elbows, radios, and the ordinary electric trust of people who had voted for each other. Past the stair, past the bricked-in door, past a short section where the invert raised and the water thinned to a shining skin, into the next curve where the bench wall widened and a doorway opened on the left with a sign that made Arjun exhale relief, ventilation, access. The door was swollen by a century of wet. Arjun leaned his shoulder in and the wood grumbled the way a heavy sleeper does when you nudge him. We lifted on the handle, which complained and then did its job as if embarrassed to have been doubted. Inside was a short passage with a grille at the far end, riveted steel, a rectangle of black behind it that tasted like the idea of outside. Bolts, Arjun said, half rust. Maybe 3 out of 6 are real and the rest are decorative at this point. He took out a little spanner as if he were standing in a shed on a sunny day, and we pretended along with him. The first bolt turned, gritty and stubborn, then loosened with a little sigh. The second sheared, which was its own kind of luck. The third stuck, and then moved. Behind us, the footsteps had found the extinguisher's hiss, and discovered it unsatisfying. Like a vending machine that eats your pound coin, the squeal rose again, closer, and this time there was a new grind in it. Pump, I said, trying to make it into a pump by force of naming. The sump pump priming, air in the line, a check valve chattering. I believed myself well enough to keep my hands steady. Bolt 4, Arjun said, and then it was off. 5, it was not. Give me the mallet. Mason passed him a little dead-blow mallet, and Arjun tapped the spanner, not hard enough to ring, just enough to tell the bolt it could have its own way if it wanted, as long as its own way was our way. It turned. The sixth came off like it had been waiting for someone to come tell it a joke. We leaned the grill into the passage. There was a shaft on the other side that went up like an exclamation mark. A steel ladder, wearing the soft pelt of rust, ran to a platform partway up, then another ladder beyond. I shone my light briefly and then back down at our feet. The beam caught little flurries of dust that acted like snow and fell in slow thought. "Air feels better," Jules said. "CO still low. O2 good. We're going to climb, one at a time." "I'll go last," Mason said. It wasn't gallantry. His camera rig was a liability and a witness, and he knew it. We went, as if the rungs were auditioning us for a show we didn't want to get into. My gloves stuck and then slid, in rhythm with my heart. Halfway up, I stopped to listen because that's what I do. The shaft carried sound like a barrel carries scent. Above, a dull hum that could have been a substation or a modern building's air handling. Below, our own breath. The soft ring of a rung as Mason's boot caught and let go, and the faraway rush of water. At the platform, a small access door presented itself with the officiousness of all small access doors. It had the remains of a seal, a sign whose letters were mostly ghost. Arjun tried it. It rattled and then opened onto a narrow duct big enough to crouch in and too small to stand. There was another grill ahead, the kind that looks like a suggestion until your shoulders inform you it is a measurement. "Give me 2 minutes with this," Arjun said, and I loved him for saying 2 minutes when time had stopped being intages. He worked with the spanner again, gentle, patient. Jules looked down the shaft and up into the duct with equal professional interest. Mason breathed like a man rehearsing calm. I, because my brain is treacherous, did some quick math on how fast footsteps had been in water and how fast they might be on dry steel. Behind us, the footsteps collected, then paused. The pause was a shape I recognized from predators and electricians. The moment where all inputs are weighed and an output is chosen without romanticism. The squeal came again, sharply, as if objecting. Then everything below us went very still. "Through," Arjun said softly. The grill came off with far less argument than the last. He slid into the duct and we followed, crouching with our backs scraping metal and our knees remembering youth very selectively. The duct opened into a chamber with a proper floor and a smell I hadn't felt for an hour. Air that had seen daylight recently, air with decisions still in it. We were in the Kingsway tram subway. It was like stepping into a parallel history where someone had decided that streetcars deserved their own subways and that you could repair an entire city by drilling under it and putting rubber tires on its promises. The vault was brick and confident. The trackbed was long gone, but the alignment read like sheet music. You could see where rails once lay, where overhead once sang. There were modern scars too, highway work overhead, ducting and cables, and all the polite nonsense of late century maintenance. We stood there, and the relief was a physical object we could almost set down. We'd linked one disused thing to another, more disused thing, and somehow that line was our lifeline. "We can follow this north," Arjun said, pointing toward Holborn. "There are gates, likely welded, likely unamused, but there's also the Strand underpass connection. One end of this is near the river. There will be access points." "Lights up a touch?" Mason asked. "Up a touch," I agreed. We raised lamps to the level of knees and then waist, and the chamber accepted it without offense. There were no figures here. There were only our shadows, which were new and therefore good. My radio crackled. It did not do that earlier, which is how I knew we were in the audible neighborhood of someone else's care. "Testing," I said. "Copy," 3 voices said, and this time the repetition felt like a blessing. We moved along the old tram vault with our beams higher than they had been in the tube, but lower than our faces. Because that had become a rule our bodies understood. even if our mouths hadn't passed the ordnance. At one point, on our right, a bricked recess held a stack of precision in red boxes. Modern cable jointing kits, fresh enough to smell like work. We did not touch their seals. We did not touch anything we didn't have to. The underpass surfaces wore the graffiti of a quieter era, names and dates and declarations that felt like postcards from the brink of something else. "Hold," Jules said gently. We stopped. She crouched and lifted something from the floor, a theatre wristband. It was damp but intact. She glanced at me and I knew she was cataloguing. If you find a living artifact, there is living close. The path took us to a sloped section where the underpass ties into a road tunnel. There was a steel bar gate across it and a sign, "Modern," explaining closure hours, a phone number that sounded patient. The gate had not been locked with malice. It had been closed because that was its job. We stood and stared at it as if respect might make it dissolve. "I could get a jack," Arjun said out of habit, and then laughed without humour. "From the van I don't have." "It's okay," Mason said. "We have time." I opened my mouth to say I wasn't sure we did when something moved at the edge of our light behind us. Just a shadow, just a change. We turned our heads as one, and our beams licked the vault and then settled low again in apology. The movement didn't repeat. The air brought us the faintest whisper of another person's breath. "Chemlight," I said to Jules. "And the last of the powder. Place them back there at the corner, and then we go over the gate." "Over," Arjun echoed, eyes already tracking the wall. We didn't give instructions to the camera. We didn't narrate. Mason filmed what he could because documenting is a kind of spell, and sometimes the spell is for the person holding the device. We stacked our bodies. Arjun braced. I put a boot in his gloved hands and stood on the strands of rebar welded to the gate for honesty and not much else. My gloves found the top. The metal was rough from corrosion and kindness. I swung a leg and then the other, sat on the gate for one rude second, then dropped to the other side, knees bending to save ankles. The others followed. We didn't ask whether we could help from this side. We were 4 parts of a thing, and each part did the bit it was supposed to. On the far side, a maintenance door sat off to the left. It wasn't locked badly or well. It was locked in the ordinary way of civil things. We moved past it because if you start treating every door as a revelation, you end up lost in a novel instead of a city. The tunnel sloped down again, then up, then turned a soft corner where air grew cooler. Not from water this time, but from night near the river. Near the next bend, we heard it, footsteps again, but on brick, not on water. They were slow, so slow. And then, as if reminded, faster. Not running, not quite, just corrected. "We'll leave the light," Jules said. She set the second chem light on the ground, flat. It's green, like a tiny underwater bar in a hotel you can't afford. She placed the flood lamp near it at a very low level, like a courtesy light on a stair. She turned her head away to keep her own pupils large. "If you want to follow, follow. If you want to stay, stay." I don't know whether she was speaking to the figures or to herself. The underpass led us to a door with the kind of latch that says it only wants to be convinced, not conquered. It opened, jolting, into a stair that felt ordinary. Concrete treads, a handrail that had seen every variance of grip, sound that didn't echo like a tunnel because it had outgrown the romance. We climbed, our breaths the only narrative for a moment. At the top, a metal gate. Beyond it, the smell of night air properly salted with river and diesel, the rattle of a distant truck, a gull's rude commentary. We were on a side street near the embankment. The Thames lay a short block away, black and folding. The sky had that quality that is neither late nor early, but simply wants to be dark on its own terms. We stepped into it like swimmers. For a long moment, we simply stood there. A few damp, tired people looking suspiciously like the end of a small team exercise. There were voices nearby, the kind you get when people are waiting for rides that take too long. Not panic, not yet. Mason lowered the camera. Jules rolled her shoulders and let a laugh escape the way you let steam escape a kettle before it moves into the ugly part. Arjun rubbed rust onto his trouser seat without caring. I looked down, and only then realized one of my gloves was not on my hand anymore. I didn't remember losing it. 100 small things had been traded away without receipts. Hospital, Jules said, which is a way of saying, do we go toward the people who can help when help needs to be triage and triage needs to be fast? Let's get you all decontaminated, she added, more professional now. It's just water, but water is a story you should wash off. A siren sounded across the river, not the scream we expect, but a measured climb and fall, European in its caution. Blue light washed a bridge, then ducked behind a building. In the glow, a handful of figures clustered near a bus stop turned their faces up, as if hoping the light would talk to them. When the colour drained, they turned them back, and that was when I saw it. One man's small, precise motion of rubbing at his eyes, like the light itself, had been an irritant. The thought I had then was neither science nor kindness. It was a simple sentence. We are not done. Listen, Mason said quietly, and for a second I thought he meant the river, but he meant the squeal, which had followed us up through brick and canyons of buildings and now lived as a memory inside our hearing. I closed my eyes and placed it the way you place a sound you can't see. Corridors, ducting, vent shafts, stairwells. The city is so stitched together underground that a groan in one place can answer a whisper in another. The phantom train was the pump, yes, but it was also the city speaking to itself, and lately it had picked up new words. Faster without light, I said again, softer. It was not poetry now. It was policy. It was a thing we could act on. We crossed the street. We let our beams point dutifully to the pavement until we reached the corner where lighting was better. The police had erected a temporary tape cordon downriver, the kind that says please and maybe in alternating stripes. A small crowd was ordering its own fear into various shapes. A woman in a purple coat was answering a constable with stiff precision. The constable's partner kept looking down the steps toward the river, as if waiting for the next line. Jules adjusted her high-vis from her pack into a vest that had seen better shifts. She approached the constable with the easy cadence of colleagues who have learned not to waste each other's adrenaline. Paramedic, she said. We've just come from a service tunnel. There are individuals below acting. Atypically to light, you'll want lamps low. Keep eye contact minimal. Let illumination be a floor, not a wall. The constable did not scoff. He did not posture. He rubbed at his eyes once in that same small motion and nodded. Copy, he said, and his voice made the word mean something. We gave him what details we could without becoming a map for people who love maps too much. We pointed away from the entrances and toward the places where air moved, where shafts met the night. We didn't talk about doors that were kind to spanners or rungs with 2 sound welds left. We are storytellers and engineers and medics and camera people, not invitations. A work van rumbled up with the logo of a utility company that had lost patience with secrecy weeks before. The driver brought out a plastic tote of clean water and a malodorous bottle of industrial detergent. We washed elbows, hands, faces, the backs of our necks, the way you do when you've been inside a machine. The river kept folding itself into an argument with its banks. The siren across it finished its stanza and began again. Keep the lamps low, the constable told his partner, and it wasn't until I heard the sentence in someone else's mouth that the fear felt less like a personal failure and more like a shared project. We didn't go home. That night's home was wherever you could make the rules you just learned serve more than 4 people. We stayed near the cordon, not in charge, not particularly welcome, but not exactly uninvited either. Jules helped set up a small triage, mostly water and words, because physical wounds weren't what the night was selling yet. Arjun spoke to a crew about pump rooms and sump levels, and how water chooses the places to make the floor treacherous. Mason did the thing he does best, held a camera like a mirror until people felt like they belonged in the world he was showing them. I drifted to the edge, where the underpass breathed its quiet into the night. My meter was still on. Its tiny screen traced a familiar mountain range of harmonics. The squeal had an origin, and if I could trace it, if I could show a manager or a brigade officer where a noise was physics and where it was footsteps, we could stop sending people into a song without a score. I don't know who touched my elbow. It was a light contact, like someone reminding themselves you are real. When I turned my head, a man stood there with his shoulders rounded against a cold that wasn't yet in the air. His jacket was too thin. His face was the face of someone who had not eaten any lie all day, except the ones that let you get from one door to another. He looked past me to the mouth of the underpass. "I waited for the train," he said apologetically, as if he were confessing to staying too long at a pub and missing last orders. I could hear it. I thought it had come back. "It hasn't," I said, and then because half of my job is conceding that the world is allowed to be literal, and half of it is telling people when they are wrong, I added, "Not in the way you think." He nodded like I hadn't corrected him. "It's faster without light," he said. "It was always faster without light." He rubbed at his eyes, quick and tidy. "I'll go home now." "Do," I said, and heard how inelegant the syllable was. "Take light with you, point it down." He smiled in a way that seemed unrelated to joy. "Down," he repeated, and walked away. In the days that came after, what we learned in the tunnels followed us. Inside the boroughs and far beyond, people noticed it in stairwells where bulbs had failed, and in lifts where emergency lighting found the floor. We didn't name it a rule. There's danger in making poetry into policy, but we handed it around like a tool. River police took to shining their lamps on gunnels and decks rather than faces when calling to people along the embankments. Security guards learned to walk with waist-level torches that made the world soft instead of accusatory. Underground crews building lists of things that make sense this week put keep lamps low underlined twice. When I was asked to stand in front of a municipal mic and tell the story of a noise, I didn't mention the padlock style or the gauge of bolts that surrendered to a spanner. I used diagrams with no doors. I said refuge a great deal. It is a good word. I said we do not go looking, we go listening, and the heads in the back rows didn't nod, but they didn't leave. A week later, I went back to Aldwych, this time with people whose job it is to keep cities intact. We didn't go far. We went far enough to set small, respectful lighting low along the bench wall and to mark the places where water wants to dream itself bigger. We made a map of sound, which is not lines and numbers, but a set of sentences you can hear. The squeal still carded itself slowly through the tunnels, and when it did, you could hear footsteps far behind answer with a sudden, quiet enthusiasm. We turned our lamps downward, and the enthusiasm became caution. Not fear, not flight, just caution. Sometimes caution is the distance between a story you can tell and one that gets told about you by people with kinder words. I can say this much and still keep the vows I made to the doors. The tunnels don't belong to us. They are a city's closed eyelids. We moved under them and learned something both ugly and elegant about how bodies make choices when their maps go dark. The infected move faster without light. It is not a curse. It is not an incantation. It is a parameter, and parameters can be designed around. If you find yourself underground, any city, any winter, and you feel your lamp try to climb from your boots to your face because fear wants to know what it's looking at, remember our little rules. Keep the cone low, as if light is a floor you are laying for friends. Count the refuges. Do not let your eyes be a siren. Do not make a map for strangers with your speech. Bring everyone you can. Leave no markers that invite someone braver than wise. I still work with concerts and offices. I still calculate the dB of a choir and the reverberation time of a lobby. But sometimes, late, the city asks me back to the places where sound is older than intention. I go with thick gloves and a meter and the quiet bravado of someone who knows the difference between risk and instruction. And every single time, when darkness falls like a lid and the first fast footfalls skitter at the edge of hearing, I think of us on that bench wall and of a woman pressing her palms to tile to keep from tipping forward into somebody else's bad idea. I think we are not brave. We are reminding each other how to move. The first phantom train you hear is always a pump. The second is hope. The third is a lesson in how not to hold your lamp. We learn to see by teaching our light not to testify, and to run by choosing, for once, not to. We came out into a night that had not asked for us and made it a little wider, with rules so small you can whisper them between the booms of the river. That is all a city is, in the end. Not the tunnels, not the platforms, not even the beautiful glazed tiles catching the sweep of your lamp. Just a whispered set of rules people agree to follow so they can meet each other before the dark makes up their minds for them. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.